Good day, governors. Coach Troy here, IFBB Pro, well, former IFBB Pro, apexphysiques.ca, your go-to resource for physique development. This is going to, my intention is this is going to give you sort of a fast track, if you will, to gaining more lean muscle mass. And I put together originally last year, volume 1 hypertrophy or hypertrophy. And in volume 1, I kind of laid a framework for you and didn't go too deep, but it will definitely help create that foundation. Here in phase 2, in volume 2, I want to go deeper. I want to take this deeper format and get you to understand in about 15 to 20 minutes, this is how long it will take, on the importance of muscle damage and why we need to create it in the gym. And I'll touch on it, why you need to do it also. So we're going to dive real deep here and go into these in more detail. So let's go over the first slide here. We're going to talk to you about your muscle fiber, right? Let's say, for example, this is your bicep, right? The bicep brachii. And we go deeper and we take it into the account of the sarcolemma, the plasma membrane, right? Now, the sarcolemma being the plasma membrane, right, is where we're going deeper into the muscle cell. But I want you to pay attention to this word if you can. This is called the nucleus. It's known as AKA the nuclei. So keep that on the screen of your mind, right? The nucleus. This is where DNA is transcribed, right? We make more DNA. And remember, proteins come from amino acids, which come from DNA. This is the mitochondria, right? This is the powerhouse cell of our body, right? This is this highly organized organelle, which is responsible for converting protein, fats, and carbohydrates into energy, which is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is really important for muscle contraction. So we need to understand that too. The myofibril, we all know that myofibril is 70% of skeletal muscle. Where's the other percentage come from? Well, I believe up to 20% comes from connective tissue, and the other 10% comes from mitochondrial, maybe more sarcoplasmic hypertrophy or sarcoplasmic organelles, right? Protein molecules and so forth. But this is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is where calcium is stored, right? Specifically, calcium ion. And we all touched on ATP, right? ATP and calcium are the two main core drivers of muscle contraction. Muscle contraction actually won't occur without ATP and calcium. So remember the nucleus, keep that on the screen of your mind if you can. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. I want to talk to you about muscle damage, right? That's what we're talking about today. My mentor, one of my mentors, his name is, God rest his soul, he's gone now, he passed away in 2001, is Mike Mentzer, the late, great Mike Mentzer, way ahead of his time. He speaks about something really important. He talks about triggering the growth mechanism into motion, triggering the growth mechanism into motion. What's he talking about? I often thought and sat deeply and wondered what he's referring to. I think that this is what he's sort of talking about. Excuse me. Now, I could be wrong. But when we're creating muscle damage in the gym, right, we all know that damage promotes some type of inflammatory response. It promotes cytokines and inflammatory cells. And that's great. That helps with repair. That's really positive. We need to do that. So that's why muscle damage is important. However, muscle damage, when we create the damage, usually on the eccentric lowering phase, right? Depending on which rep, right? If we're trying to build muscle, let's say myofibril training or myofibril hypertrophy, let's say 6 to 10 or 6 to 12 rep range, right? Which is ideal for most physique athletes or people that are into muscle building. Now, with this muscle damage, you're creating damage to the myofibrillar units, right? And I mentioned that it promotes an inflammatory response. What happens though, this is the key here. I spoke about the nuclei, right? Now, in between the sarcolemma, which is the plasma membrane, and above that, you've got the basal lamina, which is connective tissue. But in the middle lies asleep this green thing here, this little green thing. It's called the satellite cell, right? Now, the satellite cell is asleep, but when you create damage in the gym, it wakes up the sleeping satellite cell, interestingly enough. So when that satellite cell, when you cause that damage and it wakes up, it triggers the satellite cell, that satellite cell fuses with the sarcolemma, the plasma membrane. It fuses with the muscle cell. And then interestingly, magically, it donates a nuclei. And that donation is where DNA is transcribed. We make more DNA. Remember, proteins come from amino acids, which come from DNA. So when it comes to hypertrophy, this is so important for you and I to understand. Now, this might sound a little bit mumbo jumbo, but if you play this back a few times, you'll start to understand why I get really excited about muscle damage and why we need to create it in the gym. So when it comes to hypertrophy, the satellite cell is very important, right? We create muscle damage, wakes up the sleeping satellite cell, it fuses with the sarcolemma, it donates a nuclei. Interestingly enough, when that nuclei gets donated, you've got more DNA, you've got more transcriptional activity, more proteins, more amino acids being produced. In actual fact, you're going to start to bring in other metabolites, things like you may have heard before, mTOR, MAP kinase, calcium signaling pathways, all come to facilitate that muscle damage that you created. My concern is, are we creating too much muscle damage? And then we start taking one step forwards and then two steps back. So this is why I think load and reps need to be looked at, and they actually do matter when it comes to hypertrophy. I mentioned earlier, 70% of skeletal muscle is myofibril, 20% is connective tissue, or up to 20% is connective tissue, and the other 10% is mitochondrial proteins, right? So when it comes to the muscle cell, right, this whole muscle here, let's say this is your bicep. On the outside of that, you've got something called the epimysium. Now, the epimysium is on the outside of the whole muscle. Here's the fascicle, right? So we'll pull that out. We've got the fascicle here. So around the fascicle is connective tissue called perimysium. And now we've got the muscle fiber or the muscle cell. And around that, the connective tissue is called the endomysium. All right. So epimysium's on the outside of the muscle, the whole muscle. The fascicle, we've got perimysium. And then around the muscle cell, we've got the endomysium, right? I already mentioned about the satellite cell, how it donates the nuclei. So we've got the satellite cell, and then above that, we've got the basal lamina, which is the connective tissue. And then we've got the plasma membrane, right? The sarcolemma. Let's go deeper. We've obviously spoken about mitochondria, right? How mitochondria gets converted into ATP, which is going to serve towards muscle contraction. Myofibril, we already spoken about, has 70% of skeletal muscle. But I do want to go a little bit deeper. Actually, I want to go to the smallest subunit of the myofibril. What's that, you might ask? It's the sarcomere, which is the smallest unit of contraction, which is the actin and myosin, right? The myosin is the thick contractile protein. The actin is the thin contractile protein. So this is how muscle contraction occurs. Something called the sliding filament theory. Here is the M line, and here is the I band. Here is the A band, where basically the actin and myosin overlap, right? So here is the I band where it's lighter, and the dark bands is where you've got overlap, right? We all know, by the way, that muscle is cylindrical, it's striated, and it has multiple nuclei. So keep the nuclei on your mind again, right? Do I believe will serve towards hypertrophy? I believe somebody has to go through all methods of hypertrophy. You've got to go through the HIIT, you've got to go through volume, combination of both. Maybe you got to do 30% of your 1RM, maybe high rep stuff to create a pump in the gym. Maybe you got to do more myofibril, which is maybe between 6 and 12 repetitions with heavier loads, maybe up to 80% of your 1RM. So it all matters, right? There's not just one thing. Hypertrophy isn't just one thing. It's several things that need to come to the aid. They're bringing this to attention now in the research now. They're talking about the stimulus of hypertrophy, right? That we've got mechanical tension, we've got muscle damage, and then we've got metabolic stress, right? So now they're saying now that we can build muscle, not just with myofibril, which, by the way, most people think that myofibril or people think that hypertrophy is more sarcomeres lined up in series or lined up in parallel. And that's one way of hypertrophy, but there's many others. So your reps and your loads really do matter. But going deeper than that, we also have to look at the standardization of the stimulus. What does that mean? Well, the standardization of the stimulus, what it means is, what do the reps look like? So the take-home message is, if we really, this is the last slide, by the way, the take-home message, if we want growth production to happen, right? So basically growth meaning size, right? Hypertrophy, which means basically increasing the size, increasing the volume, increasing the mass, increasing the cross-sectional area of a muscle, then these three elements need to be seriously looked at and implemented. Number one, I kind of touched on it already on the previous slide, the stimulus event, right? The standardization of the stimulus. What do the reps look like? Before that, though, we have to be mentally up for the workout, right? We can't just walk into the gym willy-nilly and just kind of just sort of get a pump and then leave. We have to be up because we need to create muscle damage, right? It's going to hurt. So we have to create stress. We all know that we create stress and we create myofibril damage, right? Inflammatory response, cytokines, inflammatory cells. We also know that the satellite cell has muscle stem cells like to it. So that will aid in also healing and repair too. But we want to do it in a way, when we create this damage, we want to do it intelligently. We don't want to just go in there and just slam weights around like what we used to do back in the day with really loose form. By the way, having loose form does serve a purpose for hypertrophy. I think when you do too much of it, being loose, like, for example, how people out in Texas at the Metroflex gym, Ronnie Coleman's gym, right? They all train very loose. What it does is it tears down a ton of myofibril protein, which is great for repair, but too much of it, I believe, could lead to dysfunction and injuries. Now you've got mobility problems, which will lead to muscle problems. So number one, we have to be mentally up for the workout. So that may mean setting an intention before you head into the gym that you're going to create some serious damage. And also we're going to do it in a way without sacrificing form and execution, which leads me to my next point. I want you to become like your own form police in the gym. You want to really monitor your execution, especially if you're a seasoned practitioner. Maybe you're more of a mature lifter. Maybe you're 35 and upwards. Maybe you've been doing this a long time and you've got a lot of wear and tear on your body, and that's okay. This is where maybe you need to be very intelligent with the stimulus, and also understanding that what we did 20 years ago worked then, but is it going to work now? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we need a new rational approach on how we train. Maybe we need to look at, instead of chasing reps and sets, maybe we need to look at actually challenging the target muscle. Number two, I kind of touched on this already. Nutrition is the core driver of hypertrophy, because that's how you create energy, right? Mitochondria power turns into ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which aids in muscle contraction. Where does muscle contraction originally starts from, right? The motor neuron at the brain, at the motor cortex, sends a signal to the spinal cord, then to the muscle. The more efficient that lineage is, the more successful your workouts are going to be. So I look at ATP, adenosine triphosphate, as the most important variable when it comes to muscle contraction. But did you know muscle contraction cannot occur without ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and calcium ions specifically? So let's talk about the actin and myosin contractile proteins, right, from an ATP standpoint. So let's say this is your myosin head, which is the large protein molecule. And then we've got the actin, which is the thin protein molecule. Basically, ATP joins to the myosin head. ATP would then dissociate to ADP and phosphate, cocks the myosin head and binds to the actin. ADP and phosphate dissociate, performs a power stroke, muscle contraction, but it's stuck. We need more ATP. ATP comes along to the myosin head, releases the myosin head, then we're back at the start. That's why energy and the food you eat matters, my opinion. If you ate nothing but processed food, is it going to affect mitochondria production? Absolutely it will. Number three, and this is what I'll leave you on, holistic muscle regulation. What does that mean? Well, are we practicing recovery principles? We've got the stimulus, right? We're creating stress in the gym, right? we leave the gym, the body instantly wants to go into repair. So basically what's going to happen now is intelligently, the body's going to put back what was used up in the workout. So it's going to restore, right? It's going to basically fill in the hole, so to speak. And then after that, it's going to go into growth production. My point is, I believe this is important to know, that our body isn't as resilient as we think it is. I think how much load you lift and how much stress you're putting on your body, right? That muscle damage needs to be looked at. Now, you might say, well, I'm going to train chest today and then train legs tomorrow. That's great, but isn't the body trying to heal the damage that you caused the day before? So this is why I'm afraid to say we need to look at volume and load needs to be cautiously regulated, and more importantly, your frequency. To add to that, the holistic muscle regulation is all about having a holistic view in your mind of building muscle, meaning when you leave the gym, you want to get into that Buddhist monk mindset state. So what I try and get people to do that work with me, I get them to do some type of diaphragmatic breath work. Maybe that would be box breathing. Maybe we're getting into a child's pose and getting their body back into balance. We created sympathetic dominance in the gym, right? We've created stress. And now we want to create what we call parasympathetic, which could be another word that you've heard in the culture of hypertrophy. Are you implementing cold showers, contrast showers, cold therapy? Are you implementing infrared saunas, red light therapy? Are you doing meditation? Are you getting outside and getting the daylight on your skin, getting the sun on your eyes? Are you doing these things to facilitate muscle repair? You know, these things I think are just as important as the stimulus itself. I think when you get the stimulus just right, and that's the goal of a coach, right? The goal of a coach, if you were to hire me as your coach, my duty is to figure out how much stress you can tolerate in the gym, how much volume you can tolerate in the gym, and then hopefully you can stick to the plan. So holistic muscle regulation is right up there with oxygen when it comes to building muscle hypertrophy, right? We already mentioned hypertrophy, what we're trying to do. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to increase the size, increase the volume, increase the mass, increase the cross-sectional area of a muscle. Remember, the goal isn't to complete reps and sets. The goal is to challenge the muscle. So when we leave the gym, we're immediately going to go into rehabilitation. That switch is going to go off, and we're going to eat good food. We're going to focus on chewing our food properly. We're going to sit in solitude. We're not going to be looking at our phone, eating, scoffing food down. We're going to pay attention. We're going to pay attention to our digestion. We're going to pay attention to our gut health. As Stan Efferdon once said, I believe, it's not what we eat, it's what we absorb. So this would be a part of the holistic muscle regulation, repair for growth, advancement. This is something that the greats were talking about years ago, and maybe it's a lost art. Maybe a lot of people aren't talking about it. I once heard now new research has come out that we need to be doing 52 sets per body part. I think that's correct. I could be wrong there. Could be 53, but I think it's around 52 sets. If muscle damage is what you're trying to create and you're going to be doing 52 sets, is that potentially maybe over training? If we're this fragile beings, right, we're not as resilient as we first thought we were. If we're trying to create damage and we're doing 52 sets, right, per body part, for me, that's overkill. Can we get the job done with less volume? I think we can. But first, we have to go back to the standardization of the stimulus. What does your form and execution look like? That's it for me. If this is giving you any thought or ideas, or you're going to look at maybe utilizing some of the techniques that I've shared today, feel free. Drop me a comment in the comments section below. Hit the like button, but more importantly, hit the subscribe button. This is the kind of content that I'm going to be bringing to you on a consistent basis. I really hope this has given you some food for thought. It's got the wheels turning in your mind. And here's what I know for sure. If I've spoken some truth today about your frequency and maybe potentially maybe going too heavy and maybe not looking at the form and execution, maybe it's suffering, then maybe I've imprinted something on your subconscious that's going to now move the needle forward. But what will happen, because I know it's happened to me many times, I understand that execution and proper form and precision reps is important for building muscle, especially if you don't have the genetic of these pros that you see on stage, right? These pro bodybuilders have great they got great roundness and fullness to the muscle bellies. They've got great genetic makeup, but also they've got more connected tissue products. They've got more glycogen stores than the average person, and that's why their muscles expand more than the average person. So I hope this has helped you. If it has, leave a comment below, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe. This is Coach Troy Brown signing off. I hope this has served you in some way. Cheerio, governor.